Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. According to the Young and the Restless recap on Wednesday, August 13th, Nick Newman nearly decks Billy Abbott, and Victor Newman will grieve over Victoria Newman's appeal. As Nick and Adam Newman catch up with Victor, there will be some discussion at the Newman Ranch over Billy and Phyllis Summers' support for Kane Ashby. Adam will get ready to proceed as soon as the legal department gives its approval once Victor gives him the all-clear to disseminate the information that Kane is Aristotle Dumas. Eventually, Victoria will show up and ask to speak with Victor privately, so Adam and Nick will head to Crimson Lights. Victoria will confront Victor in the interim over his scheme to have Audra Charles end the romance between Claire Newman and Kyle Abbott. Victor won't see the issue with making Kyle appear bad in Claire's eyes and will stand up for his right to defend his family. Victoria will believe that her daughter should have the opportunity to discover for herself, regardless of whether Claire experiences heartbreak. Victoria will consider how Victor's actions nearly ended their relationship by reminding her of all the times he meddled in her personal affairs. Victoria will worry that if he doesn't let this go, he might lose her permanently, even though she won't want that for Victor and Claire. Victoria's plea may evoke some difficult feelings because Victor will end up hugging her while crying. Billy will be preoccupied when Sally Spectra tries to talk to him about Abbott communications at the park. Billy will at last acknowledge that Jack Abbott requested him to act as an insider and spy on Kane since Kane is pursuing Jabot. Sally will become irritated with Billy's lack of enthusiasm in the media firm she has been putting her all into and have some reservations about that strategy. Billy will choose to put Sally in charge of Abbott Communications since he is already focused on pursuing Chancellor. At the coffee shop, Billy will later run into Nick and Adam, who will question him about if he is collaborating with Kane to achieve his goals. Billy will act defensive and respond to criticism that Victor gave Nicky Newman Chancellor as a new toy. Nick will yell, "That's enough," and caution Billy against discussing his mother in such a way after he mentions that Nicky is acting like the CEO. As the altercation intensifies, Nick will pose a serious threat and advise Billy to try spitting his teeth out while running his mouth. Billy will allow Nick to try to get even with him, but Nick will concur with Adam that Billy isn't worth it. Adam and Nick will be certain that Kane has Billy in his back pocket once Billy leaves on Wednesday's YNR episode. Kane will disclose that he ordered some empanadas for Jack because they had a scheduled meeting at Society. According to Jack, that will be a power move, a means of exercising authority similar to what Kane did when he kept them all captive on his nice estate. Kane will presume they won't be making a deal after noticing the disdain in Jack's eyes. Jack will acknowledge that he has changed his mind about selling Kane his interests in Abbott Communications and will encourage him to go out of town. Kane will adamantly deny such and demonstrate his confidence in his company's vision. Jack would remind out, though, that Kane might want to keep in mind the perseverance of those he is against if the rumors he has heard are accurate. In the end, Jack will return home to Diane Jenkins Abbott and provide an update on his stressful encounter with Kane. In the meantime, when Lily Winter stops over to visit him, Kane will phone her in the park and apologize for missing her. Kane will hope they can still get together since he still believes they have something to say to one another. According to spoilers for The Young and the Restless, Kane and Lily will have a crucial conversation shortly, so tune in. Without a tear in his eye, Victor had endured vicious business takeovers, sour betrayals, and even assassination attempts. However, he was unable to resist the tightening of his neck as he stood in the dark corner of the Newman Ranch study tonight. Victoria's voice was breaking, but not out of rage or disobedience, but rather in a desperate, unvarnished cry that went right through every barrier he had ever put up. She was his daughter, the young child who used to run to him after school with drawings in her tiny hands, not the calm, unflappable CEO at the moment. Additionally, she was requesting something from him that he found difficult to provide. "Please, Dad," she pleaded, her eyes sparkling. "Everything and everyone will be destroyed if you push this any further." Between them sat the weight of her words. She was discussing more than just business. This had to do with family and the boundaries Victor was stepping over in his unrelenting quest for dominance. She knew him well enough to know that, once he put his mind to something, there was very little that could change it, with the possible exception of this very moment. Victor swallowed hard because his chest hurt, and when he did speak, his voice was raspy. "You believe I'm trying to harm you?" Even he was astonished by the intensity in his voice. "I do everything for my family." However, he experienced the sting of doubt as he spoke. Why did his own daughter treat him like the enemy if that were the case? Slowly, Victoria shook her head. "You do it to win, not to lose. And occasionally, Dad, victory is more expensive than it is worthwhile." Victor's eyes burned, and a tear fell down his cheek before he could turn away as her voice broke on the final syllable. It wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the indescribable fact that his own child was afraid of the course he was on. In a rare, tender gesture, he moved closer, his big hand cradling her face. "Victoria, you have my heart. Never assume otherwise." They were silent for a moment. Even if their conflict was far from ended, there was a truce in the silence of that room tonight that seemed genuine despite its fragility. No matter what he did next, Victor knew that her request would come back to haunt him. Over his empire, his adversaries, and even his own feelings, Victor Newman had dedicated his life to perfecting the art of control. He had never been broken by vicious business takeovers, sour betrayals, or even assassination attempts. Never letting himself be vulnerable with tears, he had faced them all with an iron will. But as he stood in the dark corner of the Newman Ranch study tonight, he had an unusual sensation, a constriction in his throat and an uncontrollable pressure behind his eyelids. His daughter, not the competitive corporate world, was the driving force behind his current situation. Normally so calm and authoritative, Victoria's voice was cracking, not out of rage or disobedience, but rather in a desperate, unvarnished cry that cut through all of his defenses. At this time, she wasn't the unflappable CEO of Newman Enterprises. She used to run to him after school with crayon drawings in her tiny hands, grinning proudly at her work. She was his little child. She was now requesting something from him that he wasn't certain he could provide. She murmured, her eyes sparkling with unshed tears, "Dad, please. Everything and everyone will be destroyed if you push this any further." Between them, the weight of her words weighed heavy. This was about more than just business, hostile takeovers, or mergers. This concerned family and the boundaries Victor was stepping over in his unrelenting quest for dominance. No one knew him better than Victoria. This, she realized, was likely the only thing that could stop him once he set his mind to something. Her anguish, the dread in her voice, and the way she viewed him as a daughter who still thought he had the freedom to make a different decision in spite of everything, rather than as an enemy. Victor felt an unexplained tightness in his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough and he swallowed hard. "You believe I'm trying to harm you?" He was surprised by the emotion in his own voice. He had mastered the technique of cold calculation and detachment over decades. But now that he was hearing Victoria's pain, he sounded nearly hurt. "I do everything for my family." He had been repeating the same phrase to himself for years, so it came naturally to him. But he felt the sting of doubt as they escaped his lips. Why did his own daughter treat him like an enemy if this was really for his family? Why did he feel that he was losing a lot more right now than he was gaining? Slowly shaking her head, Victoria's face showed deep sadness instead of rage. "You do it to win, not to lose. And occasionally, Dad, victory is more expensive than it is worthwhile." The last syllable caused her voice to break, and that was the ultimate blow. Victor's eyes were burning, and a tear fell down his cheek before he could turn away or brace himself against the passion that threatened to overtake him. It wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the overwhelming burden of realizing that his quest for dominance had led him to a point where his own child was afraid of the repercussions of his behavior. That he might be destroying the same thing he said he was protecting in his attempt to preserve the Newman heritage. They were silent for a long time. Unspoken regrets, the specters of past conflicts, and the ominous threat of future ones pervaded the air between them. To keep others from getting to the heart of who he was, Victor had dedicated his life to erecting barriers. Victoria, however, has always been an anomaly. No one else had ever been able to connect with him the way she did. And now that she was in front of him, she wasn't battling him with corporate scheming or boardroom strategies. She was battling him with love and the heartbreaking realization that sometimes the greatest loss was not giving up but rather refusing to give in. In a rare, tender gesture, he moved closer, his big palm lifting to cup her face. The gentleness of the action contrasted with the calluses on his palms, which were the result of decades of vicious ambition. His voice was scratchy and low with emotion as he continued, "Victoria, you are my heart. Never assume otherwise." The fight between them was temporarily put on hold. In the face of this brittle, short-lived peace, the conflict over Newman Enterprises, the power battles, and the betrayals were all irrelevant. However, Victor was aware that this moment would haunt him even as he looked into her eyes. No matter what he did next or how the business conflict played out, Victoria's silent but insistent voice would always be there, asking him if winning was worth the price. He did not miss the irony. Victor Newman had dedicated his life to making sure that no one could control his decisions or compel him to do anything. And now he was confronted with the one thing he had never really prepared for, the chance that he might be mistaken. Here in the silence of his study, his daughter's tears reflecting the faint light. That he had forgotten what really mattered in his unrelenting desire to control everything. What would happen to the empire he had created and the legacy he had worked so hard to defend if the people he cared about most were lost in the conflict? He kept thinking about what Victoria had said. Winning is more expensive than it is beneficial. He'd always thought it was all about winning. Losing meant being weak. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether strength came in multiple forms. The hardest and bravest battle he may face might be putting his family before himself and taking a back seat. Like other moments, this one went by. The burden of the outside world, his obligations, and his character returned to him. The conflict was far from over, and their truce was shaky. However, something had changed. Victor had spent his life building armor, and now there was a fracture in it. He realized that this night would stick with him as he saw Victoria exit the room, her shoulders squared again, her mask of control returning to its proper position. That he would always remember her appeal and his own unusual tears as a reminder of the stakes, regardless of how the game turned out. There had never been any doubt in Victor Newman's mind. But today, with the specter of his daughter's suffering still present in the dim light of his study, he gave himself permission to think about the unthinkable, that perhaps the greatest strength was not in victory but in letting go.